It all started the day my dad sat me down to talk about the future of the business. Now, I knew this day would come eventually. I mean, I'd been running the family business with him since I was 16. But that didn't stop the sinking feeling in my gut when he said those words. It was like he was setting the stage for something huge, something that would change everything. And honestly, I didn't like the look in his eyes. He had this uneasy, almost apologetic expression, like he was about to give me some bad news but wasn't sure how to break it. "Son," he began, his voice more serious than I'd ever heard it, "there are some things I need to tell you. Things about the future." I could tell something was up. The fact that he was treating me like an adult, an equal in this conversation, was weird enough, but the hesitation in his voice made it clear that there was more to it than he was letting on. That's when she walked in. I didn't even have to look up to know who it was. The heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The soft cough. The way she always seemed to appear out of nowhere, like she had some radar for these kinds of moments. It was my stepmom. And that's when the red flags started waving in my head. For context, I've never really had a normal relationship with her. When she first came into the picture, I was 16. Dad had been widowed for about 2 years, and I think he was just desperate to get back to some kind of normal. She seemed nice enough at first, until I realized she wasn't exactly a fan of me running the business. From day one, she made it clear she wanted more control over everything. At first, I brushed it off. I figured it was just a phase, a power struggle. But over the years, her demands got more persistent. She was always there, always hovering. And with my dad's health declining over the past few months, I began to get the feeling that she wasn't just trying to get her foot in the door anymore. No, now I felt like she was trying to bulldoze her way into the whole damn house. But I didn't know how far she'd go until that day. The day she decided to help with the business. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, and your father and I agreed that it's time for you to take on more hands-off role," she said, her tone smooth and calm, like she was talking about a regular Tuesday. I froze. My heart started racing. "What the hell? Hands-off role?" I shot a glance at my dad, trying to gauge if he was serious. But his eyes were downcast, like he was avoiding mine on purpose. My mind started to race. What was going on? Was he really agreeing to this? "Look, son, I think it's time you took a break. You've worked so hard all these years. Maybe it's time to." That's when I snapped. "Maybe it's time for what, Dad?" I didn't mean for my voice to come out so sharp, but I couldn't hold it in. This wasn't how things were supposed to go down. She smiled, a cold, calculating smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It made my stomach churn. "You don't need to worry, sweetheart. We'll handle everything," she said, turning to my dad with this look of triumph on her face. As if she already knew how this was going to play out. It hit me. I could see it all now, the gears turning in her head. This wasn't just about control of the business, this was about control of everything. She was positioning herself to be the one in charge. And the worst part? She was probably right. She had the connections, the experience, and, well, the charm to make it happen. But she didn't know what I had up my sleeve. She thought I was just some kid who didn't understand the game she was playing. But I knew exactly what I was dealing with. And if she thought she could just waltz in and take over my father's legacy without a fight, she was sorely mistaken. This wasn't just about business. It was about my family, my future, and something far bigger than either of us. I didn't know exactly what the next steps would be, but I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. No one takes what's mine without a fight. And I was about to make sure that she knew that. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, my stepmom, sitting in that chair, smiling like she'd already won. The thought of her taking over the business made my stomach turn, But it wasn't just that. It was the way my dad looked at me when she said, "It's time for you to step back." His silence spoke volumes. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think. The office was usually my refuge, the one place I felt in control, but today, it felt like a cage. My phone was blowing up with calls from various clients, and I ignored every single one of them. I had bigger things to deal with. The thought of my dad handing over control to her, of her being the one to decide how everything should go from here, was unbearable. I spent the next few hours pacing around my apartment, trying to come up with a plan. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I needed proof. I couldn't just go to Dad and say, "Hey, I think she's trying to take everything." I had to show him what she was doing behind the scenes. That afternoon, I showed up at the office early. The place was quiet, too quiet. I passed by the desks of employees who I knew respected me. They knew I'd been the one to keep everything afloat when things got tough. I stopped by the supply closet, pretending to grab something, when I saw her. My stepmom was standing in the doorway of my dad's office, talking to one of the senior managers. I didn't hear exactly what they were saying, but I caught enough to know it wasn't good. She was telling him about changes coming, about making sure everything runs smoothly when Dad steps down. I wanted to storm in there, yell at her, tell her she had no right to even be in this office, but I knew that would only make me look like the crazy one. I needed a better angle. I stayed out of sight, pretending to focus on my phone. The next few days, I started watching her every move. I made myself invisible at the office, blending in with the background like some shadow, all while observing her. It didn't take long before I realized she wasn't just trying to take over operations, she was maneuvering behind the scenes in ways I didn't even understand. I'd see her pull people aside, employees, suppliers, even clients, and they'd listen to her with a respect that seemed almost too eager. I hated it. It felt like a slow burn, the way she was worming her way into the business. But I knew what I had to do, gather intel. Every conversation, every slip-up she made, every email she sent, I needed to document it. It was the only way I could fight back without making it look like a personal vendetta. Then came the night I almost got caught. I had spent hours in the back office, scrolling through company records. I had a pretty decent idea of how she was trying to siphon resources into her own hands. There were emails, contracts with strange clauses, and sudden shifts in accounts that didn't make sense. If I could prove that she was undermining Dad's legacy, if I could connect the dots, then I could stop her. But I was so focused on the screen, I didn't hear her footsteps behind me. "You know, you shouldn't be snooping around in here." Her voice was so calm, so collected, that I almost didn't hear the threat beneath it. I turned around, trying to hide the panic creeping up my spine. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking at me with that calculating look again. "I was just checking the quarterly reports," I stammered, trying to sound casual. "You know, making sure everything's running smoothly." "Right," she said, her lips curling into a smile. "Sure you are." The air between us felt thick with tension. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I knew she could tell I was lying. She wasn't stupid. She had to have known what I was up to. The problem was, I couldn't back down now. "You should be careful," she said, her voice low, almost too soft. "People have a way of getting hurt when they push too far." I barely kept my cool. But the challenge in her eyes only made me more determined. "I'm not the one trying to take everything away from my dad," I shot back, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through me. "You're the one that's been making moves behind everyone's back." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything else. She just turned on her heel and walked out of the office without another word. I sat there for what felt like forever. Was this the beginning of her playing dirty? Was she already onto me? The next few days felt like a game of cat and mouse. Every time I thought I had the upper hand, she'd pull something else. She'd rearrange meetings, send cryptic emails, and speak with people in hushed tones when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I knew she was trying to throw me off balance, to make me doubt myself. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had to stay one step ahead of her. But the more I gathered, the more it became clear, this wasn't just about the business. She was trying to take everything. And if I didn't act fast, I might lose everything I'd worked so hard to protect. It wasn't long before the tension between my stepmom and me was suffocating. Every time we crossed paths, it was like walking through a minefield. I'd say something, and she'd smile that fake, polite smile. She'd ask if I was ready for a break, her voice dripping with sweetness that made me want to scream. But I held it together. I had to. I'd been gathering evidence quietly, documents, emails, even the phone calls I knew she thought I wasn't listening to. But I needed more. I needed something concrete, something I could throw in her face the next time she tried to overstep. And then, I caught a break. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was at the office, working through some emails when I saw it, an email that looked like a mistake. She'd sent it to the wrong person, someone who had been working with her on all the shady deals I'd been tracking. I quickly opened it up, pretending to check something else on my screen. The subject line was innocuous enough, budget allocation, Q4 adjustments. But when I opened the email, I nearly lost it. It wasn't about the budget. It was a list of names, important names. Clients, vendors, investors. People I knew were integral to the business, people who were connected to my father. And in that list, her name was there. But not just her name. It was her plan, a detailed breakdown of how she was going to assume full control. She even started secretly siphoning funds into her personal accounts under the guise of emergency funds. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew I had to act fast, but I couldn't just send this off to my dad. He'd probably just brush it off as one of her management techniques. I needed to show him the bigger picture, to prove that she wasn't just after the business, she was after everything. The only way to do that was to go deeper. I needed access to her private meetings, the ones she thought no one was watching. So, I did something I'd never done before, I hacked into her email. It wasn't that difficult. I'd been learning a lot about cybersecurity in my spare time, and she wasn't exactly a genius when it came to protecting her accounts. Within an hour, I had full access to her entire inbox. The more I dug, the clearer it became, this wasn't just some corporate takeover, this was a full-on hostile takeover. And I was the only one standing in her way. But things started getting dangerous. It was only a matter of time before she figured out someone was onto her. I wasn't sure how, but I started noticing things. She'd walk past my office and give me these looks, cold, calculating looks like she could see right through me. And then, one day, I got a text. It was from an unknown number. I know what you're doing. You think you're clever, but you're playing a dangerous game. Don't make me show Dad the truth about you. It was one of those moments where everything goes quiet. My heart pounded. Who the hell was this? I checked the number, but it wasn't one I recognized. A quick search showed it wasn't linked to anyone in the company. I knew it had to be her. The way she phrased it, like she had some trump card up her sleeve. I should have been scared. I should have backed down. But there was no way I was letting her win. Instead of shrinking back, I started playing my own game. I had the leverage now, but I needed something more. Something that would guarantee she couldn't turn the tables on me. I arranged a secret meeting with one of my dad's old colleagues, someone who had been part of the business for years but had quietly left after some disagreements. He'd heard things, seen things, and was more than happy to share what he knew. That's when I got the full picture. My stepmom's plans weren't just about controlling the business. She had been working with a rival company for months, setting up deals behind my dad's back, offering them insider information. It was clear now, she had been working on this for a long time. She wanted to sell out. She wanted to be the one to control everything, and she didn't care about the people who would get hurt along the way. This was it. The game had changed. Armed with all this intel, I felt a new sense of purpose. But I also felt the weight of what I was about to do. I couldn't just confront her head on. I needed to make sure I had every angle covered, every loophole closed. If I made one wrong move, she could easily turn things against me. It was time to get serious. I started laying the groundwork. I began reaching out to some of the key people in the business who I knew still respected my dad. I couldn't tell them everything, I had to be careful. But I could get them on my side, at least enough to create a wall of support around me. I also reached out to a lawyer, one of the best in town. I couldn't risk relying on Dad's old legal team. They were too loyal to my stepmom, and I knew I needed someone who had no ties to either of us. This wasn't just about protecting the family business anymore. It was about keeping control of what was rightfully mine, and what had always been mine. I wasn't going down without a fight. It all came to a head on the day of the big shareholder meeting. My dad had planned it for weeks, and he was convinced it was just going to be another routine update. A few presentations, some reports, and maybe a discussion about expanding the business further. But I knew better. This meeting wasn't going to be about the future of the company, it was going to be the battle for its soul. I had everything lined up, documents, emails, insider information, proof that she wasn't just trying to run the company, she was trying to sell it out to the highest bidder. But I wasn't going to walk into the room and throw it all on the table. No, I needed to wait for the right moment. The last thing I wanted was to give her time to spin her story, to manipulate the board members the way she always did. I had to hit her hard. The meeting started like any other. The shareholders, the top executives, even a few of my dad's old friends were sitting around the long table. But I could feel the tension building. Everyone knew something was up, and they all sensed the same thing I did. There was a power struggle coming, and only one person was going to come out on top. She sat there, all calm and collected, wearing that damn smile she always used when she thought she had control. My dad was at the head of the table, his hands resting on the documents in front of him. He looked tired, distracted, but there was something else in his eyes too. Regret? Fear? Maybe both. "Let's get started, shall we?" my dad said, his voice a little too quiet for comfort. Everyone nodded, and the meeting began. I had rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times, but the closer I got to standing up, the more I realized just how much was riding on this. The weight of my dad's legacy. My own future. Hell, the future of everyone in that room. She didn't even try to hide her smugness when I finally stood up. "You're a bit early with your presentation, son," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But go ahead. The floor's yours." I couldn't let that slide. "Not now." "I think it's time we talk about your presentation," I shot back, not even flinching. The room went dead silent. Her eyes flashed with anger, but I could see the crack in her armor. She wasn't ready for this. I dropped the files on the table, and for a second, everyone looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I didn't care. It was time for the truth to come out. "These," I began, my voice steady despite the fire burning inside me, "are records of conversations and transactions you've been making behind my father's back. And behind all of our backs." I could see her trying to keep her cool, but she was visibly shaking now. "You've been selling information to our competitors. And you've been using his name, his reputation, to secure deals that put the company at risk." The room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. I glanced at my dad, His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. But then, I saw it, the smallest flicker of recognition. He knew. He knew it all along. But he'd been too scared to confront her. I didn't stop there. I pushed the papers across the table, showing the contracts, the emails, the bank statements that proved what I was saying. "You've been trying to take over everything," I continued, my voice rising with each word. "But it's not just the business you want. You want control of the entire family." She shot up from her seat, knocking over her chair in the process. Her face was red, her hands clenched into fists. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This is my business now. You're just a child who can't handle what's coming next." Her words hit like daggers, but I wasn't about to back down. "Maybe you're right," I said, slowly walking toward her. "Maybe I can't handle what's coming next. But I'm not the one trying to destroy everything Dad built for the sake of a power grab." The board members were watching now, their eyes darting between us. I could see the confusion on some of their faces, but I also saw the change. The uncertainty. They weren't sure who to believe, but they couldn't ignore the evidence I was laying out in front of them. And that's when she snapped. Her voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. "You think you've won? You think your little game of chess is going to get you anywhere? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy everything." But I had one final piece to drop. I pulled out the last document, the one that would hit her where it hurt the most. It was a legal agreement I'd signed with my lawyer, a safety net in case things ever went this far. The document outlined everything I needed to take control of the company if my father was incapacitated, and it had already been signed by him. I tossed it on the table with a calmness that shocked even me. "You're done," I said, watching her face fall. The room went quiet again. The board members were silent, too stunned to say anything. "And my dad?" He looked relieved. Maybe even proud. It didn't take long for everything to settle after that meeting. Well, settle might be a bit of a stretch. The dust didn't exactly clear, but it was obvious who had come out on top. My stepmom didn't go down without a fight. She fought dirty, as I expected. She tried to turn some of the board members against me, but they had already seen the evidence. They'd seen her game. And suddenly, her charm didn't have the same effect. After the meeting, things were awkward, to say the least. My dad didn't say much at first, and I didn't push him. He was still processing everything, I could tell. But I saw him a few days later, sitting in his office, looking more like the man I remembered. He had a clear look in his eyes, like he was finally seeing things for what they were. The weight he'd been carrying around, maybe not just from the business, but from the whole situation with her, seemed to lighten. When he finally spoke, it wasn't what I expected. He didn't apologize or even thank me. Instead, he just nodded, almost to himself, and said, "I knew I couldn't see it. I was too blinded by her." It stung. But I couldn't blame him. He'd been in love. He trusted her. It's easy to get caught up in someone when they're good at pretending. "I don't know what to say, son," he continued, "but I guess I owe you one. You were right. You've always been right." Hearing that, it wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. Don't get me wrong, it felt good to know I had done what was necessary, but the victory tasted bittersweet. I didn't want to be right about her. I didn't want to have to protect the business like that. But I had no choice. I sat there, letting the silence hang between us, and then he finally dropped the bomb. "I'm handing you the reins," he said. "It's time." I looked at him, not sure if I'd heard him right. He repeated it slowly. "You're the one who proved you can protect this business. I don't have the energy anymore, and frankly, I'm not sure I ever did. I built it with my blood and sweat, but I think it's time you make it yours." His words hit me hard. I didn't expect it to happen like this. Not like this at all. "Are you sure?" I asked, not sure if I was ready for this. He nodded, his face weary but determined. "You've earned it. All of it. It's yours now." And just like that, everything changed. The business that had once felt like a weight around my neck suddenly felt like something I could shape, something I could truly make my own. But with that came responsibility. There was no way I was going to let it slip through my fingers. I had my chance, and I wasn't about to blow it. But it wasn't just about the business anymore. The real change was in the air between me and my dad. We were finally seeing eye to eye. We weren't just father and son anymore, we were partners. I wasn't just stepping into his shoes, I was standing next to him, ready to take the next step together. As for my stepmom, well, let's just say she didn't take her loss quietly. But the funny thing is, she never actually left. Not in the way you'd think. She stayed around, trying to hang on to whatever little bit of power she thought she could salvage. She didn't make any big moves, but you could see it in her eyes. She'd always believed she was entitled to more. And I knew she was still scheming. But it didn't matter anymore. Her grip was slipping, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. There were still moments of tension, no doubt. I'd hear whispers from employees about her subtle attempts to undermine me, or the way she'd make snide comments at family gatherings. But I didn't care. Every time she took a shot, I just reminded myself how far I'd come. The first few months were a blur, managing everything, learning how to handle things without my dad's constant guidance. But with each passing day, I started to get the hang of it. The weight wasn't as heavy anymore, and I realized I was capable of more than I thought. The business started to thrive. My decisions were respected, and my vision was clear. I'd learned from the best, and I wasn't going to let it all slip away. What my dad had built, I was going to make it stronger. And as for my stepmom, well, she eventually stopped trying to play the game. I'd seen her once or twice in meetings, looking frustrated and bitter. She knew she'd lost, but I wasn't looking to rub her face in it. She made her choices. And now, I was making mine. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about protecting the business or standing up to her. It was about taking control of my future. About owning the life I wanted to live. In the end, that's what matters most. It wasn't about winning some power struggle, it was about proving to myself that I was ready. Ready for whatever came next. And as I sat there, looking out at the company I was now running, I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to build something even greater.